Picture a city built to last forever. Marble columns rising 40 feet above streets paved in volcanic stone. Aqueducts carrying water across valleys. A treasury swollen with gold. Ancient accountants stopped counting past 2.7 billion sesterces. Rome in the 1st century was not just a capital. It was the center of the known world, and it bled from the inside out. The walls of the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. They had seen things no stonework should remember. Blood dried in the grout between tiles. Servants scrubbed it out before dawn. By evening, fresh stains replaced the old ones. The throne room smelled of incense and iron, and the men who sat on that chair rarely died in bed. Walk through the Forum on any given morning in those decades. You would see senators moving in clusters, heads low, voices lower. They had learnt something the provinces had not yet figured out. The emperor was not a protector. He was a weather system, unpredictable. The Colosseum floor was layered with sand for a reason. Sand absorbs blood faster than stone. On certain afternoons, the crowd noise could be heard a mile away, roaring for kills that had nothing to do with justice, and everything to do with one man's appetite. Lions dragged across the arena. Ostriches cut down mid-stride. Beyond the arena, Rome's 14 districts stretched outward, in a maze of tenement blocks, temples, and market stalls. 10 of those districts would burn to ash in a single week. The fire moved faster than anyone could run. Families grabbed what they could carry and fled toward the Tiber, choking on smoke so thick it turned noon into midnight. And when the flames finally died, the cleared ground didn't go back to the people. This was the world, not the Rome of textbooks, not the clean white statues in museum halls. The real Rome was loud, crowded, and dangerous, ruled by men who treated the treasury like a personal vault, and they treated the population like furniture. The Praetorian Guard, supposedly the emperor's protectors, operated more like a private cartel. They chose who lived. Somewhere beneath all of this, the empire still functioned. Roads still connected provinces. Grain ships still crossed the Mediterranean. Legions still held the frontier. That was the terrifying part. Rome could absorb an extraordinary amount of damage from its own rulers and keep standing. A severed head on a lance. That was how Rome learned its emperor was dead. Not through decree, not through Senate vote, through a trophy paraded down streets still wet with his blood. Pertinax had tried to restore order. He lasted 86 days. The Praetorian Guard cut him apart and carried the proof through the Forum like a hunting prize. The guards stood in their barracks and opened bidding. The Roman Empire auctioned like livestock. Didius Julianus raised his hand, 25,000 sesterces per soldier, a fortune most men couldn't imagine. He outbid his own father-in-law by 5,000 per head, and walked out believing he had purchased eternity. He had purchased a coffin. 66 days, that was the shelf life of bought loyalty. No legion beyond the capital recognized him. No province sent tribute willingly. 3 generals on 3 frontiers declared themselves the true emperor and turned their armies toward Rome. Julianus tried to buy his way out again, offering coin to Septimius Severus to simply turn around. The Senate answered instead. They declared him an enemy of the state. Soldiers found him in his own palace, weeping, asking what crime he had committed. Septimius Severus marched into the vacuum with blood still drying on his boots. He killed Julianus, crushed 2 rival emperors, then turned on the Senate itself. Hundreds of senators executed, hundreds more replaced. Replaced with men whose only qualification was a sword arm and blind obedience. He raised military pay from 300 to 400 denarii a year, a number that sounds generous until you trace the debt it carved into every treasury that followed for the next century. Severus did not hide what he was. On his deathbed in York, cold rain falling on Roman Britain, he told his sons the only truth he believed in. Enrich the soldiers, ignore everyone else. Caracalla collected that receipt in December of 211. His younger brother Geta stood in their mother's arms. Caracalla's men dragged Geta out and stabbed him. The mother's robes soaked through with her son's blood. Then the purge, 20,000 dead, maybe 30,000. Every friend, ally, servant or acquaintance of Geta erased in weeks. Caracalla ruled alone now, and alone he spent. His edict extending citizenship across the empire read like liberation. It was a tax net. More citizens meant more taxable bodies. He debased the currency, drained the provinces, and still found enough silver to build bathhouses. Bathhouses that held 1,600 Romans at once. The water ran hot, the treasury ran dry. His campaigns bled gold from every corner of the empire, and the soldiers he enriched watched him grow more erratic by the month. Every one of these men carried the same fracture inside them. Not madness, not cruelty for its own sake, something colder. The absolute certainty that power owed them something, and anything standing between them and that debt deserved to burn. The throne did not corrupt them, it simply gave them permission. Which of these emperors do you think carried the deepest rot? The one whose sin cost Rome the most in the long run. An old man's belt that was the instrument, not a sword, not poison. A belt pulled tight around his own throat in a room in Carthage, because the only alternative was worse. Gordian I did not choose to be emperor. He did not campaign for it. He did not scheme. An armed mob in Africa shoved the purple onto an 80-year-old senator who had spent his entire life avoiding exactly this kind of trouble. And the moment he accepted, he was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. That is the machinery of Rome at its ugliest. Not the tyrants who seized power, but the decent men who had power forced into their hands. Like a lit torch in a room full of oil, he tried to make it work. He named his 46-year-old son co-emperor, split the weight of an impossible crown between two skulls instead of one. The Senate in Rome recognized them both overnight, not out of respect, but out of raw desperation, to rid themselves of Maximinus Thrax. 2 Gordians on the throne meant 1 fewer monster on the frontier. That was the math. Nobody asked whether the Gordians could survive it. 22 days, that is all the math bought them. Gordian II rode out to meet Capelianos, the governor of Numidia, a man still loyal to Thrax. He did not have to ride out, he could have fortified. He could have waited for reinforcements from a senate that had just declared Thrax a public enemy. But waiting meant letting Capelianus choose the terms. Waiting meant watching his father's fragile claim rot from the inside. So he rode out, and on April 12, 238, he was cut down on a battlefield he never should have been standing on. The news reached Carthage the same day. Picture the messenger, picture the doorway, picture an 80-year-old man, hearing that the son he dragged into this disaster is gone. There was no second option, no retreat, no negotiation. Thrax's forces were closing in. The Senate's support was 1,000 miles away, and the only person who made the reign legitimate was already cold. Gordian I looped his belt over a beam and stepped off the edge of the world. Meanwhile, the man they were all trying to escape was trapped in his own version of the same impossible equation. Maximinus Thrax never wanted the Senate, never wanted Rome's approval. He was a soldier, the first emperor pulled straight from the barracks. With no aristocratic blood, no political connections, no interest in pretending, he governed from muddy camps on the frontier and funded his wars the only way he knew how. He taxed the empire until it screamed, confiscated estates, stripped temples, crushed anyone who could not pay. He understood force. He did not understand that force has a shelf life. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. His own troops, the same men who had crowned him, looked at the walls. And then they looked at each other. They killed his son, mounted both heads on lances, and sent them south. And then there was the boy Elagabalus, 14 years old, a Syrian priest draped in silk. He walked into Rome and told Jupiter to move aside. He married 5 times in 4 years. He allegedly took a Vestal virgin as a bride. a crime punishable by death, and somehow kept breathing. He threw banquets where roses fell from the ceiling in massive volumes. Guests literally suffocated beneath the petals. He emptied the treasury like a child pouring water from a cup. Not out of malice, but because he never learned that cups run dry. Rome tolerated him for 4 years, and then it didn't. At 18, the Praetorians dragged him and his mother through the streets. They hurled their bodies into the Tiber. The river swallowed them without ceremony. 3 empires where there used to be one. That's where this part of the story ends. Gaul, Britain, and Spain under one flag. Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor under another. And the man still calling himself Emperor, Gallienus, clutching Italy and the Balkans like the last coins in a dead man's purse. 15 years he held the title. Rewind June, 251 AD, a swamp near Abritus. The Goths had already killed his son Herennius Etrusus. They left him somewhere in the muck and the reeds. Then they killed the emperor himself, Decius, the first Roman emperor to die at the hands of barbarians. His body sank into the marsh, swallowed whole, and no legionary ever pulled it out. Rome could not even recover its own ruler from the mud, think about that. The empire that paved roads across continents, that drained swamps to build cities. They could not drag one man out of the dirt. And what had Decius spent his reign doing before that swamp took him? He spent his time hunting Christians. He issued an edict in 250 AD, demanding every citizen sacrifice to the old gods or die. His bureaucrats printed certificates, little slips of paper called libelli, proof you had burned your incense and bent your knee. Thousands who refused were executed. More than 40 church leaders killed in a single systematic sweep. He built an entire machinery of persecution, a paper trail of forced devotion, while the Goths massed on the Danube and sharpened their blades. He looked inward for enemies while the real threat walked through the front gate. But even that death, face down in a barbarian swamp. It was not the worst Rome had waiting. Valerian picked up where Decius left off, harsher persecutions, more blood. He ruled from 253 AD and believed the old formula still worked. Crush dissent at home, fight enemies abroad, hold the line. In 260 AD, the Persians proved him wrong in a very personal way. King Shapur captured him alive, a living, breathing Roman emperor, dragged into a foreign court in chains. The reports say Shapur used him as a stepping stool every time the Persian king wanted to mount his horse. The 60-year-old emperor knelt in the dust, so royal boots could press into his back. Some accounts claim they poured molten gold down his throat. Others say they skinned him after death and stuffed the hide. They hung it in a temple like a hunting trophy for centuries. Propaganda or not, the core fact is unchallengeable. A Roman emperor died a slave, not on a battlefield, not by an assassin's blade, but as property. Each of these men believed he was solving Rome's crisis. Decius thought loyalty could be legislated with certificates. Valerian thought persecution would restore order. Every single one of them was wrong, and the empire collected on their debts with interest. By the time Gallienus stood alone in a throne room, governing a third of what it used to, the pattern was no longer a warning, it was a verdict. So here's the question no historian has cleanly answered, and maybe you can. Was there a single moment, one decision, one battle, where Rome could have still turned back from this? Or was the fracture already baked into the foundation, long before any of these men sat down on the throne? Here's the part no one wants to sit with. Every collapse you've watched so far had a moment, one single breath, where a different choice would have changed everything. And every single time, the man holding the power chose himself. Think about that for a second. Not as history, but as a pattern you already recognize. Valentinian III stood over the body of Aetius. It was September of 454. There was blood on the emperor's own hands. The last competent general Rome would ever produce. The man who broke Attila the Hun, stabbed to death by the one person he had sworn to protect. Paranoia made the decision, Not strategy, not statecraft. Just fear of being outshone by someone more capable. 6 months later, Valentinian was dead too, murdered in revenge. And 3 months after that, Vandals sailed from North Africa and gutted the city. Every domino fell from one act of insecurity. One man who could not tolerate someone else being better at the job. You've seen this before, not in a palace, in an office, in a family. Someone tears down the only person holding things together, because their ego cannot survive the comparison. And then they stand in the wreckage wondering what happened. Honorius ruled for 28 years and accomplished nothing except watching. Britain abandoned, Gaul overrun, Spain carved apart by barbarian groups. And when the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, the first time in 800 years that the city had fallen, the emperor reportedly panicked over his pet chicken. It was a bird named Roma. When a messenger told him Roma had perished, he was relieved to learn it was only the city. Whether the story is satire or truth barely matters. It survived 15 centuries because it captures something real. The man responsible for everything cared about the one thing that didn't matter. That's not ancient dysfunction. That's a choice people make every day. Guarding the small comfort, ignoring the structure burning around them. Pretending the emergency is somewhere else, happening to someone else. Like it's not their problem to solve. Romulus Augustulus, 12 years old, maybe 16. Placed on a throne by a father chasing power. The Eastern Empire never even acknowledged him. His reign lasted 10 months. A child wearing a title that had once belonged to gods. His name carried the full weight of Roman mythology. Romulus, the founder, Augustus, the first emperor, and the suffix they gave him, Augustulus, little Augustus, was not affection. It was just pure mockery. A diminutive slapped onto the end of a legacy to mark exactly how small it had become. September 4th, 476. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer walked in, and he just took it all away. No epic siege, no legendary last stand, just a quiet removal of a boy who never had real power in the first place. 500 years of Western imperial rule ended, not with a roar, but with a signature. Every emperor on this list had a door they could have walked through differently. Valentinian could have trusted his general. Honorius could have governed instead of hiding. And the system itself could have stopped handing thrones to children and calling it succession. But none of them did, because the pattern was already locked in. Power without accountability, authority without competence, legacy without substance. So the real question is not why Rome fell. The question is which of these choices you've already made in your own life, and you did it without even noticing, and whether you're still making them right now. Somewhere beneath the rubble of Constantinople, a body lies that no one ever claimed. No tomb, no inscription, no funeral procession winding through marble streets. Just a man who threw off his imperial purple and drew his sword, and walked into a wall of Ottoman steel. On the morning of May 29th, 1453, Constantine XI, the last emperor, his final words, if the accounts hold any truth at all, were not a command. They were not a prayer, just a quiet admission. The city has fallen, and I'm still alive. And then he made sure that second part wouldn't remain true for long. Think about that for a moment. 1480 years of empire. Every tyrant you've watched tear through this story. Every poisoned cup, every severed head mounted on a spike, every treasury bled dry by a madman wearing gold. All of it funneled down to one man standing on a broken wall, with 7,000 soldiers behind him and 80,000 in front. He didn't run, he didn't negotiate a comfortable exile the way Romulus Augustulus had, shuffled off to a villa in Campania with a pension, and a silence that swallowed his name whole. Constantine charged, and the silence that followed swallowed something far larger than a name. Before him, focus had shown what happens when a throne is seized, by someone who only understands the blade. 8 years of paranoia, nobles tortured in public squares, Damascus lost, Jerusalem lost. Alexandria lost. The empire hemorrhaging territory while its emperor hemorrhaged trust. When Heraclius sailed in from Carthage, the people didn't mourn Phocas. They watched his head carried through the streets and they exhaled. But the borders never fully recovered. The damage had already rooted itself into the soil, and Justinian II, the slit-nosed emperor who crawled back from exile, wearing a golden prosthetic over the wound his own nobles carved into his face. He returned to Constantinople not as a ruler but as a reckoning. 100 nobles killed at a single banquet, heads paraded on spikes. A 6-year second reign built entirely on the architecture of revenge. When they finally beheaded him in 711, they sent his head to a rival emperor like a letter that needed no words. The message was simple. This is what happens when you let rage sit on a throne long enough. Every one of these men left a crack in the foundation. Some cracks were loud, some were quiet, some took centuries to reach the surface. Now here's what stays with me, and maybe it will stay with you too. Every emperor in this story believed the empire would outlast their worst decisions. Every single one of them. Which makes me wonder, what are you so sure will survive yours? Go ahead and drop that answer below.